it's Ray. Welcome back to my channel. I'm really excited today to share with you my reading goals for 2022. I've been thinking about these for a while and I'm super excited with what I've come up with. I do just want to preface sharing my actual goals with a bit of a chat about goals and resolutions in general, because I'm in a really interesting place with my reading goals for 2022 in that initially my plan for this video was basically to say that I'm not setting myself any goals at all. And then I totally switched that around and have actually set myself quite elaborate goals. And I feel completely okay with both of those decisions as a way of being. And so I guess I just really want to stress that choosing to set goals or to not set goals is absolutely okay, and you should do what feels right for you. And I guess one of the things that I like for myself about setting goals is that I'm very forgiving towards myself for not completing goals that I set, because I set those goals almost half in anticipation of the fact that I probably won't complete them, but I also probably will get closer to having realized that goal than I would have done had I not set the goal at all. And kind of along the same vein, sometimes setting a goal actually helps you realize what you don't want to do. So with the example of reading, if I set myself a TBR, I am quite a mood reader and I don't necessarily always follow that TBR, but defining my book choice against something can still help me to read what I'm going to really enjoy or get a lot out of in that moment, more than if I just don't have any kind of boundaries at all. So I really love goals for that reason. I find them fun, I find them motivating. I am a really strong believer in intentional living and in thinking about how we want to spend our lives. And as somebody who spends a lot of time reading, somebody for whom reading is an immensely valuable and important part of my life, this year I would like to really think a little bit more about what I'm reading, which is where the reading goals come in. Like I mentioned, my initial plan for this video was to basically say that I don't really have any goals. I'm very quickly going to share with you what my no goals were, because a lot of them still kind of hold. I'm planning on participating in Kate Howe's Kindred Spirits book club, so I'll be reading the books along for that. Those are quite comfort reads, something I've really discovered and I guess just grown to accept about myself over the last year is how much I love those soothing comfort reads, and I definitely want them to continue to be a part of what it is that I'm reading. I also wanted to feel free to read books and not mention that I've read them on BookTube, particularly regarding spiritual and religious books. So yeah, I want to encourage myself to be more confident with reading stuff that I want to read and explore, but without having to discuss potentially controversial issues on BookTube. Not that anybody has ever criticized me here. I'm incredibly grateful for how open-minded and warm and caring my audience is. But sometimes you can feel quite vulnerable putting yourself out there, stating opinions about things, and I don't need to. So if I'm kind of exploring religion and I want to do that off YouTube, I should do that off YouTube. And then my last one was just to try and read in chunks of time more frequently. So I have for a long time now had a couple of reading resolutions that I make every year that I find really helpful for me and help reading to fit into my routine in a comfortable way. One of them is reading 52 books a year, so a book a week. Last year I read 67 books, so I kind of exceeded that a bit, which is great, but 52 books a year now feels, to be honest, it now feels like something which will just happen for me. I read and listen to audiobooks enough that I will read 52 books in a year. Fine. The other one is that I read for half an hour a day on a work day and an hour a day on a weekend. But I don't necessarily do that rigidly. So often I will hardly read during the week and then read a lot more at the weekend. And I want to actually encourage myself to read in longer chunks, to sit down at a weekend and read for 3-4 hours, rather than trying to read in short bits throughout the week, because I definitely enjoy reading more when I read in a really long stint. I get completely immersed in a book, you turn your phone off, avoid distractions, and that's when I most enjoy reading. That's when I get through books at the fastest pace and become fully immersed in something. So although I do enjoy having little bits of reading scattered throughout my week, I want to make a conscious effort to give myself longer extended periods of time in which I can read to allow myself to really get that feeling of immersion, which I love. So I think that will include doing things like weekend readathons, you know, perhaps as a vlog or perhaps just for myself to sit down and read for a longer period of time. Those were the things that I initially was planning to do next year. And then on Milena Reed's Instagram, she just posted on her stories a scroll through all of the books that she read this year, and then a slide which mentioned how she feels like since having started doing her TBR board game, it's really improved the quality of her reading and it's really improved the enjoyment that she gets out of her reading. And it just made me pause and think, because looking at the books she read last year, I was like, wow, that's such a great reading year. And looking at the books that I read last year, I enjoyed a lot of what I read, but I had some kind of stale parts of the year where I read quite a few books in a row that I didn't particularly love, and I think my mood reading kind of negatively affected me there, because, for example, I would read a whole series of something just because I find it hard not to complete a thing, and I kind of wanted to see where the story went, but I wasn't really enjoying them or getting that much out of them. There's maybe some genres that I didn't really read at all that I would like to be reading, and it just made me think about the fact that the few times this year that I have set a TBR, so I did 1900 to 1950 readathon, I did Victober, and I did Nonfiction November. They were some of my best reading months, and even when they weren't very successful, so like Victober, I only read 2 Victorian novels and I only finished one of them in Victober. I'm still so glad that those books were a part of my year, and had I not had the TBR formation process, then I probably wouldn't have read them had I just been mood reading. This is my long-winded way of saying that I'm coming to appreciate the beauty of a TBR, and it got me thinking that I would like to create some kind of equivalent to Milena's board game for myself for this year. So this is my plan. I sat down and I wrote out a dream reading year for me. So what kind of genres of books would I want to read, and how many of each book would I want to read? It came out 150 books by the time I'd written down every kind of genre and style of book that I wanted to read, which is way more than I'm going to read. But my plan for this year is to make the TBRs anyway, and given that, like I've just said, I feel like A, I'm very forgiving of myself for not completing them, and B, I think it's a good thing to remember and be reminded through watching other people that it's okay not to complete things. So my plan is to make 150 cards with each of the different prompts on it. For some categories I have the same thing multiple times, so for example, to read 12 classics over the course of a year. And then to use these cards to make some form of a TBR this month, and sort of play it by ear a bit as the year goes along as to how many books I want to be planning in my TBR for each month. So I might start off with, say, 12, knowing that I'm unlikely to read 12 books in that month, and see how many I have over, see whether I want to carry some books over to the next month's TBR. Maybe I want to make myself shorter TBRs if I'm feeling too restrained by it. It's quite open at the moment, but I'm really excited at the prospect of having a year in which my reading has just a little bit more guidance, and I find it really fun making TBRs. I hadn't fully appreciated until this year just how much fun it is to go through your shelves, to go through your TBR lists, to go through my Audible and Goodreads and see which books I really want to read. It's kind of actually an extension of mood reading. I think there's always this thing where mood reading and planning through a TBR are put into conflict, but your mood affects the books that you choose for your TBR, and I'm often just so glad that I've read the things that I choose for myself on a TBR, often more so than I am glad that I've read the things which I just happen to pick up on a whim. So that's the plan. Firstly, what I've done is propped my camera up on the prop that I currently want to show you. So I'm gonna finish saying this and then I need to turn my camera off and sort everything out in order to do the next stage of this video. So that was poorly planned. Anyway, I've got these postcards. Years ago, somebody bought me a box of 100 puffin postcards, which have like the covers of classic children's books on the front, which are gorgeous, but I never really knew what to do with them, and so they've just been in a box for ages. And I realised these are going to be absolutely perfect for my TBR cards. So I bought myself another box of Penguin Classics, which has grown-up classics on the front of them. I'm just going to write my prompts out on all of the different cards, and then I will share with you the things which I have put into my recipe for a perfect reading year. Right, let's actually get to the postcards now. So these are going to be my TBR cards. How lovely are these? Let me get a few out to show you. Aren't they just so gorgeous? So I'm finished, and I now have a prompt stack, I guess, of 150 cards for my perfect reading year. I'm really excited about this. I chose to write my prompts in the stamp box, just in case I decide in a couple of weeks that this was a terrible idea and I actually want to use these as real postcards, which was very stingy of me. But I do think I'm going to. I'm really excited for this. I think it's just going to be a really lovely way for me to add a bit more intentionality to my reading. It will probably encourage me to read more, to be honest, which I like that as a goal. I love reading. I get a lot of joy out of reading, and generally the more I read, the happier I am. So it's always nice for me to have a little bit of encouragement to myself to be reading more. Anyway, without further ado, let me share with you the different categories and how many reads I would like to have inside each category for my hypothetical perfect reading year. First of all, I've got 8 classics, just like general choice classic, whatever I want to read, not time specified. And in my head, I think these are the classics that I probably would instinctively pick up. So it will largely be Victorian Edwardian fiction. I then have 1 classic pre-1700, so something significantly older, because I do tend to need a bit of a reminder to read significantly older books. And lastly, 3 modern classics. I have 12 comfort reads, so, approximately 1 book a month, which is just purely indulgent, something for me, which I'm going to enjoy. And then I have 12 children's/YA books. A lot of middle grade, particularly classic middle grade books, are my absolute favourite reads. I'd like to read 1 book a year in French, and I'd like to read 1 poetry book a year. I have 3 Tom's mum books. My fiance's mum and I talk about books a lot. I don't actually think we have really similar taste, but I really like to hear about the books that she has absolutely loved, and so I think it would be really nice if there's a few books a year that I read which are strongly on her recommendation so that we can talk about them. And then I have 3 booktube friend prompts, so I'd like to read books that people who I'm acquainted with through booktube are really fond of. Either that might just be something that I've seen on their videos that they highly recommend that I would like to read, or I might actually reach out to some people and ask them to recommend me a book. I think that could be a nice idea for a reading vlog too. Next up, I have 12 prompts for worldwide windows, and what I mean by a window is basically a book that pushes me outside of my comfort zone. So I read this thing a long time ago about how it's important for children's books to offer both mirrors through which they can see themselves and windows through which they can see the wider world. And I really like this idea. I think for me, comfort reads are often my mirrors. They're books where the characters remind me of me, where the culture is very similar to my own. And I really want to do a bit better at reading things which... covering myself with the cards, and I really want to do a bit better at reading things which widen my world a bit more and show me what people's lives are like who live in very different circumstances to my own. So a book a month-ish of a worldwide window. And then I have 6 cards which are UK windows, so books which are specifically exploring the lives of people within the UK who have a very different lived experience to me. I have 3 books for memoir, followed by 3 non-fiction books. I kind of realised in Non-Fiction November this year that I don't really love non-fiction nearly as much as I love fiction, so I don't want to push myself to read too much non-fiction because I tend to just prefer fiction. However, obviously I'd like to read a little bit. Then I have 6 cards for favourite author backlist, so I mean basically everything I read is a backlist, but just to specifically choose it for an author who I love, who I know I really want to work my way through all of their works. Followed by a single card for the Booker Prize backlist. I have generally really enjoyed the books which have won the Booker Prize for fiction, and so I would like to look at the list and read some of the books which have won in previous years. 1 self-help book, 1 collection of essays, 1 biography, 1 history book, i.e. like a non-fiction history book, 12 historical fictions. I really love historical fictions, often especially children's historical fiction is something I read an awful lot of, and so I probably do read about a book a month of historical fiction anyway. 6 fantasy. I would really like to read more fantasy. It's something that I often really enjoy but tend to not reach out for, so again, the encouragement to remind me to do so. 12 contemporary. I'm not really sure how much contemporary I read, but I would like to be a little bit more up to speed with the books that everybody else is talking about. I think a book a month of a more recent release is, again, quite a good level to aim for. 6 books in translation. 6 books which I've labelled as gaps, by which I mean books that I wish I had read. An example is like Of Mice and Men. I haven't read that, and I feel like basically everybody's read it. So those kind of knowledge plugging books that I would like to get around to. 6 gifted or borrowed books, i.e. books which people have specifically given to me in order that I read them as a reminder to get round to actually reading them. I tend to read borrowed books quite quickly so that I can return them to their owners, although I do have quite a few that I've borrowed from my mum and not read for a long time. But books that people give me as presents, I sometimes don't get around to reading for a really long time, and I would like to be better at reading them quite quickly. 3 rereads. I don't reread loads, but I would like to reread at least a couple of books every year because there are obviously so many books I've really enjoyed and would love to revisit. Kind of similar to contemporary, I guess, I next have prize list, so a book that within the last couple of years, so either like this year or the year before, maybe the year before that, has been on a prize list for a major book prize, so the Booker Prize or the Women's Prize for Fiction, something like that. I often see people reading and talking about these books and how wonderful they are, and I just haven't really read any of them recently, and I'd like to be a little bit more in the loop. I'm not going to be the sort of person who reads the entire Bookalong list, or at least not anytime soon, but I would like to read a couple, especially the ones which I've heard really recommended or that sound really up my street. I have 6 cards for seasonal reads. I really love this idea of reading a little bit more seasonally and picking books that help me to associate with the season. I spend a lot of time living in a tropical climate, but I actually feel really connected to the rhythm of the seasons that I grew up with, i.e. a Northern Hemisphere set of seasons, and I like to do things to make me feel still connected to that. So yeah, picking books which are fairly related either to a specific season or just to the seasons in general. If I can't find one that is particularly wintry, for example, there are a lot of books which take you through the year and include very wintry scenes. So I love that kind of thing in my reading and would like to read more of it. I have 2 cards for spiritual books. 3 specifically for Russian literature. I have been really enjoying the Russian literature that I've read over the last few years and would like to try and make a bit more of a focused attempt to read more Russian literature. And lastly, 3 literary criticism type books. So analyses of my favourite works of fiction, or maybe even just books about books, that kind of thing. And that concludes my dream reading year. Like I say, I'm not sure exactly how this is going to pan out, but I really like the idea of having sat down and thought deliberately about what kind of books I want to be reading to really enhance my life and bring me joy and bring me fulfillment. How many books I will read, I'm not too sure about, but I like the idea that if I use these cards to support me through the year, however many books I read, it's likely that at the end of the year I should be able to look back and feel like I had a really good reading year and I read the kind of books that I would ideally love to be reading. Obviously, I also will allow myself to mood read if some something else that isn't on the cards, for example, comes up and I would really like to read it, but I would like to just stop myself from necessarily leaping straight into a book without any thought at all, because I think that's where some of my least favourite reads of the last year have come from, whereas the books where I have put some thought into them and chosen them a little bit more deliberately, that's where basically all of my favourite books of the year have come from. So, I'm going to make a separate video for my January TBR using these cards. I hope that you enjoyed this video and my reflections on reading goals and my goals for 2022. I am really ever so excited for my reading year. Do let me know down in the comments below what your reading plans and or goals are for 2022. I would love to hear about them if you have them or if you don't have any at all. Thank you ever so much for watching. Take care and I will see you soon in another video. Bye bye.